Hello everyone and welcome to the first game we're showing from the European Club Cup. We already showed one, but from the women's section, Bodana played a phenomenal game taking down Maria Muzichuk. But here we have the return of world classical champion Gukesh. It's been more than a month that he played his last classical game. It was in Samarkand. He won the final round game against Andrei Volokitin, and he did fairly okay in the tournament. So we'll see how he does now, as he faces a very, very strong player, Sergei Movsesian, who is at the moment 2600, but in 2006 he was actually 2751. That was his top rating ever, so almost as much as Gukesh has now. Obviously, we're dealing with a very, very strong player here. It's a wonderful game. Really shows how it takes two to tango, if you will, because Gukesh offers two choices. One leads to a pretty normal game, one leads to a very, very interesting game, and, well, it all depends whether the other player wants to fight or the other player is satisfied with just pushing pieces around. So yeah, I think you guys will enjoy this one. Let's check it out. Gukesh Domaraju with white opens with knight to f3. We have pawn to d5 and pawn to g3. The King's Indian attack is on the board. Bishop to g4, we have bishop to g2 and knight to d7. So a pretty standard setup, the Keres variation of the King's Indian attack. And many moves can be played here. c4, d3, d4. You can castle kingside, or you can play pawn to h3. This is like the fifth most popular continuation, but still very, very much played. We have bishop to h5, castles, and pawn to c6. We have pawn to d3 and knight g2 f6. All been played before, nothing new here. Popular moves here are queen to e1, unpinning from the bishop and preparing pawn to e4. Also, you can go knight b to d2 with the same idea of preparing pawn to e4. Gukesh goes for pawn to c4. Again, been played before, is the third most popular. Bishop captures, and now we have e captures on f3. And here, d captures and pawn to e6 are some of the moves that have been played, but g6, the move Sergei plays, is a new move. So already, as of move 8, we have a completely new game. And okay, we have pawn to f4 by Gukesh, opens up the light square bishop. Bishop to g7 also claims the dark square diagonal, and knight to d2. We have knight to c5, putting pressure on d3, and knight to f3. The queen now defends the d3 pawn. D captures, and we have a queen trade. So you're probably wondering, what kind of a game is this? The queens get traded off, not a lot of imbalance in the position. What could happen here that would interest us? Well, here it comes. Knight f to d7. Okay, so here Sergei is saying probably you will have some problems getting that pawn to b4, as we know that everyone wants to play that. So you're probably going to play rook b1, I'm going to play a5, then some b3 to prevent a4, and then some a3 and b4, and it's all been played before. Yeah, not in this particular setup, but that's kind of the plan. But Gukesh says no, bishop to e3. And he's asking, are you interested in the b2 pawn? And it's not easy to realize why, because even if rook a to b1, the bishop just moves, the b7 pawn is protected, and you can't really capture on c5 because the other knight takes its place, and the b7 pawn is once again defended. So you could just ignore all of this after bishop to e3 and just go pawn to a5, and then we go into the exact same line, rook b1, a3, b3, b4, and so on. But Sergei wants to fight. He plays bishop captures on b2, and he says, well, how much time did he spend on this? He actually spent some 10 minutes on this move, so very interesting. And also, apologies for not giving you the clock times. I didn't have the clock times in the previous video, so there we go. If you guys are interested in that, I don't know, some of you are, maybe even most of you are. But yeah, you can see that here on the previous move, he had 52 minutes. Now, making this bishop captures on b2 move, it's 42 minutes. And okay, rook 8 to b1 and bishop to f6. And what was Gukesh's plan? Well, here it comes. The plan was rook captures on d7. Gukesh sacrifices the exchange, and now the knight is hanging on c5, so you have to capture with the king. Okay, you have to capture with the knight. Knight captures on d7, and rook captures on b7. And what is the compensation here? Well, the compensation here is that Gukesh has the mighty bishop pair. He is betting strongly that he will be able to eliminate the c-pawn and the a-pawn. And then he will have the bishop pair already guarding a7 and a8, and he will be advancing the passed a-pawn up the board. So that is kind of the long-term plan. Whether it can be done, that depends on how strong Sergei will fight. Knight to b6. Okay, as the a7 pawn was all still hanging, so you have to defend it. We have knight e5, inviting bishop captures on e5, but then you have the in-between bishop captures on c6, and the first part of your plan has been accomplished. But no, we have castles kingside, knight captures on c6, and now knight captures on c4, followed by bishop to c5. Okay, so it's attacked 3 times. There's no way you can defend it, so you are losing that pawn. King g7, knight captures on e7. We have rook f to d8, and now knight to d5, going after the a7 pawn, but you're not in a rush to capture it. We have knight to d6, and the rook back to b1. Rook 8 to c8, going after the bishop, and bishop captures on a7. There is no really good way to deal with this, because even if you play pawn to a5, then you run into all sorts of nasty stuff like knight captures on f6, and there's just no good way to deal with this. Bishop captures on a8, and, it's just terrible. So you have to move that rook. So rook 8 to c8, the bishop is just much too powerful. Bishop captures on a7. And okay, Gukesh calculated this very nicely, but still the position isn't all that much. If you allow the engine even leans towards black, saying that while in human terms white does have compensation, it's actually perfectly manageable for black to hold this, but only if you are an engine, which Sergei is not. So that is what Gukesh is betting on. Knight to f5, and okay, bishop to b6. Now it's time to perfectly place your pieces and start advancing the past a pawn. We have rook to d6, and knight captures on f6. You don't need that bishop getting in your way of advancing the past a pawn. King captures on f6, and now pawn to a4. We have rook to c2, and just continuing the advancement. Pawn to a5, and now rook to a2. Okay, putting the rook behind the passed pawn. And here Gukesh plays bishop to f1, which to my eyes it is a little bit odd. But I had to consult our good friend the engine to wonder what's wrong with bishop to b7, as it does seem like you're controlling all of the squares needed for promotion. It just seems that black would have too easy of a time stopping that pawn, because all you need to do is play knight d4, and after pawn to a6, knight to e6, and there's no way for the pawn to advance. It's still much better for white, but you don't win on the spot, because if pawn a7, you just give up the rook for bishop, and that's it. And then you pick up the a7 pawn, the position is equal. So that's why Gukesh goes bishop to f1. You will need a few more moves to grab hold of the a8 square, but that is seemingly the correct way to do it. Even though bishop to b7 is the top move recommended by the engine, sometimes to beat a human, you have to play a lesser move. That's just how chess works. Knight to d4 and king to g2. And here you have to play knight to e6, as we've shown in the previous line. But Sergei makes a terrible mistake. He plays knight to c6. And what is the problem with this move? What's so terrible about knight to c6? Even feel free to pause the video and try to find the best move for Gukesh while I give you a couple of seconds. So as you guys remember from the previous line that we discussed, black's main idea against white's advancement of the a-pawn was to give up the rook for bishop. By placing a knight on c6, you cannot play rook captures on b6 at any point, so you're going to have to waste an extra move to move the knight. And Gukesh just plays a6. And now, if, let's say, pawn to h5 or whatever you do, there's, okay, you don't push the a-pawn right away, but there's bishop c5. And now the rook cannot remain here. If you go rook e6, bishop c4, and the rooks get picked off, or if you move the rook wherever, let's say go rook d8, then rook b6 wins the knight. Yes, you can defend it, but now, again, bishop to b5, and the knight is lost. So that's the way to do it. So instead, knight to e7 was played, and now, again, you have to be very, very careful. You are winning, but not if you make a hasty decision. So once again, feel free to pause the video and win the game for Gukesh while I give you a couple of seconds. Of course, none of you are considering a7, as we already discussed. Rook captures and rook just captures. Now that the knight moved, this is again a possibility, but now pawn to g4, the only winning move. And the reason for that is that whatever you play, let's say h6, a simple bishop to c5 wins, as there's no defending the knight. If you play rook to c6, for example, g5 check. Captures, captures, you're trying to remove the king from defending the knight on e7, and if king to e6, then just bishop to c4 check again, and black can resign this. So after g4, knight to c8 was played, and now bishop to c5. You're very happy to play this move with tempo, because the bishop on b6 is black's only defense to give up that rook for bishop. Now rook a captures on a6, but it's still not over. Gukesh has to play very, very precisely. Rook to b8, attacking the undefended knight here. We have rook a to c6, and now only one move that wins the game for Gukesh for the final time. Solve the position. Yes, it's simple at this point, but you had to make 15 precise moves in order to get to this position. So if you were able to do that, huge congratulations to you. But the move is rook captures on c8. And that's all there is to it. Rook captures on c8, bishop captures on d6, and now Gukesh has two bishops versus a rook, plus he's up a pawn. This is completely winning, but you still have to be precise, as Sergei will not just resign the game. He has 38 seconds on the clock, but 4 more moves to time control, and he gains more time. King to e6 was played, we have bishop to e5, and now this bishop is a monster here, so if you want to get rid of it, you have to play pawn to f6, bishop d4, and now rook to c1. We have bishop to e3, rook to c3, and just bishop to d4. Making one more move to reach time control, we have rook to c1, and now pawn to f5 with check. This is a very nice maneuver from Gukesh, because you cannot capture twice here. G captures on f5, and now Gukesh played g captures. It's even better bishop d3, as your main idea is just to eliminate h7, and then the h-pawn wins. But okay, Gukesh played g captures on f5. Now, of course, you don't capture and allow the check. So king to f7, and now bishop to e2. You will still have to work your way up the board, and now you will use the two bishops to sort of shield yourself from checks from the black rook, and you have to get your king into the game. King g7, we have pawn to h4, rook to c2, and king to f3. We have rook to a2 and king to e3. Rook to a8, and pawn to h5. So it's still possible for Gukesh to blunder, or maybe even some crazy stalemate ideas will be possible later on. So, of course, Movsesian has to continue playing. Plus, it's a team event. In a team event, you don't really resign unless you absolutely must, because, you know, it's for the team. Anything can happen in chess. We have pawn to h6 and bishop to f3. We have rook to a5 and king to e4. We have rook back to a8. Movsesian can just wait and see what Gukesh will do. King to d5, we have rook to d8 check, king to c5, rook c8 check, bishop to c6. Bridging the way for the white king to cross, rook to d8 and bishop to d5. Rook c8, king d6, rook to d8 check, king e6, rook to e8 check, king to d7, and now the rook has to leave the back rank. We have rook all the way back to e1, and bishop to e3. Rook to d1, king to e6, and rook to d3. We have bishop to c5, rook back to d1, and now comes pawn to f3. The bishop nicely defends it, and really you don't care about the h-pawn, because if black ever goes after the h-pawn, you have all the time in the world to capture on f6 and even checkmate the black king. We can even discuss this. For example, rook e1, bishop to e4, and now after you go for the pawn here, just bishop e7. Okay, let's capture the pawn. We're going to capture on f6 with check, king g8, bishop e5, and the f-pawn is unstoppable. Rook g5, you're going to play king to e7, pawn to h5, pawn to f4, and whatever you play, pawn to f6, rook e1, or whatever, and f7 is checkmate. There's nothing you can do about that. So after bishop to e4, rook to a1 was played by Sergei, and now bishop to d4, going after the pawn, rook a6 check, and now king to e7, and he was in this position on move 63 that Sergei Movsesian resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. With this victory, Gukesh climbs back into the world top 10, where, well, he belongs, and hopefully we see many more great games like this from him in the tournament and in the following tournaments. And look at this. I mean, bishop covering a7, bishop covering a8. There are no checks along the 7th and 8th rank. There is zero things black can do here. For example, rook a4, you're just going to capture the f6 pawn, and that's it. Now it's merely a matter of how you want to checkmate black. You can even give up the bishop. Let's say bishop d4, rook captures, you're going to play pawn to f6, nothing to do here. Rook to a4, f7 with check, king g7, and f8 queen will be checkmate. So nothing to do. After king e7, Sergei resigned, and a wonderful victory for Gukesh. And yeah, here's Okay, we haven't checked it for quite a while, but here's the world top 20 after, this point in time. So, like we said, not a lot of change in the top. Hikaru did lose some points as he had that slip in classical, but not much happening. Vincent Keimer climbing up three spots. He's now world number 6 with 27.68. Anish also gained some points. Wesley gained some points. Alireza dropped 3 points, and Gukesh climbs the world number 10. Or no, I think he even was. Only this victory didn't really shake it up. So yeah, we have Wei, Nodirbek, Mamidyarov, Anand, still number 14. Incredible. I'm telling you, remember what I'm telling you. We'll see Anand back in the top 10 once again. Anand on 14, MVL 15, Richard Rapport, Linier Dominguez Perez, Ding Liren, Hans Niemann, and Yanni Pomneshi at 20. So yeah, it's wild at the top. So yeah, big congratulations to Gukesh. But yeah, if your opponent doesn't want to play an interesting game, it doesn't matter how motivated you are. But here, after this was offered. Sorry about that. After bishop to e3 was played, if Sergei hasn't captured the bishop captures on b2, we probably would have a very, very boring game, and probably maybe even Gukesh wins it in the end. But yeah, Sergei wanted to fight, and that's why we got this great game. So always, when your opponent wants to fight, it's a gentlemanly thing to accept the offer. So yeah, hope you enjoyed it. I would like to thank P.A. Bauer, Gerard St. Pierre, Brazos Valley Chess Society, Francesco Corradi, and Uzi Shalev for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing to check up on your wonderful suggestions and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day. And if you want to learn how to sacrifice material for the initiative, first link in the description below. Download Lotus Chess and really improve your opening play. See you soon.